Hey everyone, it's Kayvon with Askari Art. So I'm really excited. This is the last video of the piece that I've been working on called Procrastinating Fear. Now, it's a 48 by 60 piece. If you haven't done so, check out the other videos that I have in the playlist regarding this piece. And I'm excited. Let's do it.
So as I look through this piece, what I noticed is that I wanted to connect the two orange sides on the left and right. So here I added a bunch of ember or orange, and I'm going to try to connect the lines over to the left. My right, because I'm facing you. But you have to be very delicate because there's still layers that are underneath, and if you're not careful, you'll completely remove the layers underneath. So what you have to do is, what I do is I try to move the alcohol around enough to where it doesn't stay in one place too long, and I'm able to redraw those lines as I try to connect the flow of the lines on the right, your right, to the flow on the left. You have to do it in bits and pieces, and don't be afraid to work on both sides at the same time. So here you can see I'm adding more orange or ember, and I'm redirecting that line, redirecting the two sides. This takes a lot of patience, and you just have to know where you want that color to be, and as you guide it with the brush and the blow dryer, you have to be very aware of the areas that you want to keep and the areas that you want to remove. So I'm adding more alcohol so that I'm able to move it much quicker. And when you do that, when I add the amount of alcohol that I've just added, it helps me get really soft edges, and it also allows me to move it as a whole, so it feels like it's part of one area versus like doing it in bits and pieces where you can add detail. But when you add detail, you can do it in little bits and pieces, but it just doesn't feel like it's part of the whole thing. So it's going to take a lot longer to blend. So for this, I was really purpose was to blend the purple into the orange, so that it feels like it's blending up into the orange, and you'll see where the detail starts coming in. The idea for the detail for me was to have it very, very pressured and very fine. So all of that softness on the top is going to get crushed in this little thin line of orange with fine cracks inside. And you'll see. Just continuing to add alcohol to it, so that I can keep the work fluid. I don't want it to dry up too quick. So here's where I start defining where I want that thin border. And I do have a cup with alcohol in it that helps me add even more direction as I go through it. See, I'm just lacing the brush with alcohol, and as it's wet on the top, I'm redirecting it, making my little fine cracks and crevices where I'd like that pressure to be. I'm not afraid of messing it up, and you shouldn't be either as you're painting. Don't have that fear of messing anything up. Just have the open mindset of, you're learning, this is a journey, you're learning from every experience, and that's what this painting is about. So now I'm using the brush to add even the smaller details within that pressured area. And I'm also aware of the lines that are surrounding it and the direction of those lines leading into this small little pressured cave area. So the alcohol's dried up top, and I need to keep it fluid. And I also want to lead some of those lines back into it so it's not so soft on the top. One trick to help with, getting the alcohol to kind of fade is to pour the alcohol where it's just, there's no ink, and gradually move it in to where there is ink, and that softens your edge. So I'm now starting to see, and I'm starting to define the lines that are further out. Now I don't want them to be too close to each other because I still want them to move your eye into the crevice in that small crack that I've already defined. That's almost center of the painting. So as I'm working through this, I still want it to be soft, and I want some edges, but I want the edges to be further apart from each other. So that's why I keep pouring alcohol to redefine and to move the ink around to where I like it. Now, if you feel like you're frustrated with this part, like if I was frustrated or started getting frustrated for this little section, like if I can't get it to where I want it, what I would recommend is to move to a different part of the painting and then come back to it. And I actually do that a lot. For this, I'm getting it to where I want it, so I'm not as frustrated. But in most cases, if something isn't moving like I like, I'll tend to move to a different part of the painting and just let it go and come back to it. See how the lines are further apart from each other, and I'm pouring the ink and redirecting it with the brush to reconnect some of those really wonderful, playful lines. So for this painting, I'm actually using a very flat brush. The flat brush helps me move the ink just in an even way so that I can get that sharp line that I like. You can use a rounded brush, and a rounded brush gives you a different effect. But I've used rounded brushes on some of my other paintings, and you could probably check it out. But for this particular painting, I want to move a lot of ink around as fast as possible, and that's why I'm using the flat brush. The flat brush also gives me a very nice fine edge that I can bleed off. Continually moving the ink, keeping the ink wet. It helps me just, it helps the movement of it, and I keep redirecting more and more lines just to get it to where I want, so that there's no crossing, so the lines don't cross each other, because then it just destroys the flow that I'm trying to get with the painting itself. So as you can see, looking at this from the top down, the lines are kind of overlapping each other, and they get tighter and tighter as they get to the center. So now we're going to start adding the detail of that center area. It's not really centered, but it's centered to where your perspective. So now we want to redirect those lines and spread them out as if it's coming out as if you're compacting a stream and then having the water spread as the mouth of the river gets larger. And that's the idea for this. It's that compression to release. So I continue to add detail here in small, fine little cracks. Just make sure you have your cup with alcohol. I keep dipping it in, adding more orange. I want the orange or the ember to be very concentrated in this area. But what I do is I dip my brush in the alcohol, and I move it so that there's light areas leading into a dark edge. That's what gives you that nice, fine, crisp line, and the gradual fade from canvas to crispness. So now I'm going to try to keep adding the detail with the edge of the brush. You notice I'm using the corner of the brush versus like the flat end. Just a small little detail. I don't know if you noticed that, but there you go. Now I'm using the flat end to soften it, and then I come back in and I'm basically using that little corner to scrape up the ink. So now we're going to focus on this little corner here, and I want to try to lead that orange out and soften it to the bottom or top left corner. And so now I'm redirecting some of those lines that I have from that crevice out. And what I have to do though, I have to keep pushing it in and out to give me that soft look that I need. See, I'm using the brush to kind of guide it and set the lines where I want them. Now it's not going to be 100% the way I want it, but once I get most of it the way I want, then I can come back and add more alcohol like I just did there and move other areas. It's very iterative. It's a very iterative process. Now this is sped up to about 350%. So this process is much slower than it actually seems. And I sped it up because it helps you kind of see my gestures and movements as I go through it versus a slow, tedious process to where you have to sit there and watch it for 3.5 hours. So I continuously add alcohol to keep it fluid as I tend to start moving the ink, and you see how I'm moving it and softening it as I go, pushing it in to get some more pigment to activate the alcohol ink and to use that to push it back out. The alcohol is obviously an activator, and it also activates other colors that are within the pigment, if there are any other colors within it. So as you can see here, you see some orange coming out of that red color. That's what the advantage of ember is. When alcohol activates it, turns orange, and sometimes you're able to use that and pull some of that orange out if you keep thinning it down, reactivating it, thinning it down. So it's a really nice gradual effect. Now I'm moving it over so that I can kind of connect it to the center area that I was working on. I want to try to make it where it doesn't feel like it's a completely different area. I need to kind of start blending it in to make it feel like, so see how I just poured alcohol to kind of divide the two, to bring in the two divided areas. Now I've got this weird harsh line right there that I got to try to soften up. So I'm just probably going to pour some more alcohol on the outside and start to bleed it in. Right there. That's the line I was referring to. And I'm bringing it in. You see I'm connecting it back into the other lines that existed. A lot of working through it, and I'm not only focusing on this small little line that I'm working on, I'm actually stepping back as I'm using the blow dryer to push the ink around. I'm stepping back and looking at the whole piece and see where all those lines are going and how they connect, and if it works compositionally to the rest of the painting. So I'm adding the little fine details to blend it in. So right now I'm just kind of stepping back and looking at it to see how I like it, and I came back in. Now I'm working on this side, and I noticed that I just needed a few more lines to kind of widen that area up so that it feels like it's going, it dramatizes the effect from large to small, so the compression seems even more evident. So now I'm spreading those lines out so that it feels like it's being more narrow focused, laser focused into that little crevice. Just following the lines and redirecting them, reconnecting them, and blending them in. Let's zoom out a little so you can kind of see from a big picture perspective what it's looking like. So yeah, I brought the orange, it's kind of connecting in the center. So now let's look at this side. This side's a little too soft for me, the bottom side of the painting. Gonna reactivate the ink by adding alcohol, a ton of alcohol. And as soon as I start adding the alcohol, you see the orange come out, basically separating the orange, the ember, from the vineyard, the purple color. And the alcohol actually makes it a little orange as well when it's wet. So see how I'm separating it. Just keep adding alcohol, pushing the alcohol to the outside. Start activating and moving it from a big perspective, and then I'm going to hone in and start adding the detail. Working in large areas like this can be challenging. So this area right here specifically is probably about 24 inches by 23 inches, roughly. Maybe a little longer, maybe 24 by 16. So it's just by itself, it's a large area. So anyone who is used to working on smaller pieces of Yupo or poster board, just, you know, when you do this kind of thing, focus on small areas like that and expand. If you feel confident, then you can start, like, do the whole canvas at once. But I tend to like to do this just so that I have a little bit more detail. When I do the whole canvas, I tend to do that to just get the base layers down. I'm not really looking for a final piece as I'm doing the whole canvas. So start small and build up, but I think I advise you to just try to do a little bit at a time, little bits and pieces at a time, to help build the confidence level that you need, and also it's less overwhelming and less stressful. And when you like something, when you get it to the point where you like it, you just move on. You add more ink in another area and just start expanding. So that's my tip. If you're intimidated by a large canvas like this, just start in bits and pieces and try to blend it all into one once you're done with those bits and pieces. Sorry for the shakiness. I think I'm hitting the tripod. The camera's mounted to, so it's causing a little bit of a shake. And my big head is in the way. Apologize for that. So this area, I don't want it to be so concentrated with lines. I want it to be a very cloudy, soft effect with some lines there that lead into the direction that I want, but mostly I want the soft look on here with a few lines, more than what I had before. See how I'm redirecting it into the purple and re-guiding it, redirect it, push it out so that it doesn't feel so empty in this area. It doesn't feel off balance, and compositionally it didn't feel like it was working because it was very heavy on the other end. And now we're working to balance it out. I can't see what I'm doing here, but I'm redirecting, I'm just redefining those lines, making sure that they're separated. It's really nice and soft. Using the brush to kind of redefine and redirect. So I'm using a new cup of alcohol with clean alcohol because I don't want to mix in some of the ember that I had. And so I've cleaned my brush, and I'm using a clean brush with a clean cup to refocus and make sure that I'm not really bringing the color from the top over to here. So it's always good just to make sure to keep it clean, keep the brush clean as you brush through it, so that you're not mixing too many colors so it doesn't all look like one huge clump of color. Continuing to add alcohol. The alcohol again is the activator. That's what's going to help you redirect and move. Don't have to worry about the pigment per se for this particular piece. So when I'm painting, I'm not really using a lot of ink. I'm using a lot of alcohol because the pigment is pretty strong, and the alcohol activates and allows me to move it quite nicely. People think that I use a lot of ink, but in actuality it's a lot of alcohol. And so you can't be timid with the alcohol. Isopropyl, I'm using 99% here. You just can't be timid with that. You have to use it to move the ink around. And it's the same thing with watercolor. You need water to move the watercolor around. It's the very same principle. The advantage though to alcohol ink is that you can lift it. Probably about 90% of it. You can lift about 90% of it off the canvas. Unlike watercolor, where when you put it down on paper, it's on paper. You can't move it as easily. You'll always have a tint of it. The disadvantage to alcohol ink is the fact that you have to seal it. I typically seal all my canvas pieces with Kamar varnish and UV archival, and I do 6 to 8 coats of Kamar varnish, and I let it dry for about approximately 2.5 hours between each major coat, and 30 minutes between minor coats, like soft coats. So you always have to seal your alcohol ink, and I put approximately 3 or 4 coats of UV archival so that I make sure that the UV light doesn't fade it. I've never had an issue with fading. I just, that's the disadvantage of alcohol ink, the fact that it can fade if you don't coat it well enough. And this is for canvas. There is other ways to do it if you're painting on board, clay board or anything like that. You can always seal it with resin as well. But I don't like sealing canvas with resin because it just, resin is heavy and it tends to sink all to the center, and I don't like that. I like a very nice fine art finish, and that's what the Kamar varnish and UV archival does for me. I do have a video in my list of videos that teach you how I do that, how I do the steps of actually coating and protecting my canvas after I've painted it. Check it out. It's in my list of videos. So here, as I'm reconnecting lines, I'm adding some concentration of lines like I did on the other side to off balance it. Then I come back and soften the outside. So I'm working different parts of this canvas as I'm going through from the center, and I look over and I see something. It's like I'm jumping from one thing to another. It feels like I'm not focused, but I'm actually looking at the different components and try to blend them in so that it does feel like it's working as a whole piece. That's just an ongoing working progress. So make sure you take that in mind as you're working through it. So I think that part's good. I'm beginning to like that area, and as you can see now, I'm going to focus on the bottom right corner, and it just feels a little empty. Need to extend some of that color out. So let's do it. I'm moving everything over to this side so that I can start focusing on here. Now, in order to start, I'm going to activate the ink by pouring alcohol. But I'm going to pour alcohol kind of in the white area and through, so that the lighter area and through, so that I can activate that pigment and use the brush to activate certain areas to push in and pull out some of those colors. Now, I've noticed here that it is very light, so I do need to add some of that vineyard back in so that I can help. I don't want it as light here, so you'll see me in a minute. I'll probably start adding vineyard in, because the ink can only stretch so far. Redirecting some of those lines. See how I'm adding a little bit more detail. There we go. So I'm adding the ink, the purple vineyard in there. There we go. Not adding a lot, I'm just adding enough to where it doesn't get too dark, but I have enough pigment to stretch out so you can slightly see it. Redirecting those lines, making sure that there's nothing crossing paths. Letting certain areas cross and others not. Cognizant of the whole piece compositionally to see, you know, if it works as I'm reconnecting some of these lines. You've noticed I've kind of left the area on the outside the same because there we go. Now I'm starting to reactivate that pigment and moving that ink around to soften it up and redirect it inside. See, just using the brush. I'm going to soften this area up. Oop, got a little speck. Don't want that. Using that alcohol. So I'm dipping my brush in a clean cup of water again, or clean cup of alcohol, sorry, to redirect this color. So I don't want orange in my cup, so that's why I have to pour a new cup of alcohol and clean my brush again, because I don't want the orange on this side. It's already enough, the ember and orange. So right now I want the bluish purple or violet. Just kind of redirecting it, making sure the lines are where I want. Sorry if my head's in the way here. Alright, I think I like that area. So now I'm going to go back, and I noticed a little off balance here in the top left corner. I'm just going to redirect some more lines in this corner so that it offsets. Just didn't like that area as much. I wanted a little bit more detail, so it may be so small and insignificant to the viewer that I'm actually spending the time to just add a little detail in the left corner. Again, it's the artist's choice. I didn't like some of the stuff here, so I'm like redirecting some of that line, and I've poured some alcohol in a little container that has a needle point. It's like a needle point that allows me to pour less alcohol so I don't mess up a lot of the areas that I've already worked. I'm just, you know, it's my choice to kind of play with this area and redirect. I just didn't like the way it was looking compared to the rest of it, so that's why I'm adding a little bit more detail, a little bit more lines, and blending it in, making sure that it has that same effect as the other side. You see here, I'm kind of redirecting those lines, giving you some lighter depth areas, and just reworking it. So I love how these crevices and these little cracks are coming in from the different parts, and that's why I went back to rework that top left corner. I wanted to give you a little bit more depth and a little bit more of the folding of that effect in that corner, so that the bottom left, the bottom right, the center bottom, and the top left that I'm working on right now feels like it's converging and coming together. And that was the idea. And that was the idea for this painting. It's refading, and there you go. There you have it.
Hey everyone, I think I'm finally done with this. So I'm gonna hang it this way, vertically, and it's going to be called Procrastinating Fear. That was what the name originally was. And the reason why I have it vertical is the fact that fear starts below, starts in here, and I have it coming up and out and sprouts. Now, fear comes out, and it comes out in different ways in everyone. This is just a representation of how I feel inside sometimes when I procrastinate. That fear, and just set it aside. Sometimes procrastination is fear. So, but that's just in me. I hope you really enjoyed the journey that I'm on. I'm going to bring the camera in and show you some detail. I really enjoyed this journey. I'm glad, I hope you did too. Be sure, if you haven't done so, please hit subscribe and the bell to notify you anytime I have a new video. And let's go into some detail on this painting.